Good morning, Garland Nixon here with Professor Richard Wolff, my favorite Marxist economist, and we're going to have a great discussion today about some things that are probably relative to the U.S. election. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I just want to remind everyone, Dr. Wolf has an outstanding YouTube show, and it's called Democracy at Work, and I never miss an episode. So, and he's on with lots of other guests. So now, heaven knows, if you search YouTube, you will never find. You'll find. It's interesting, Professor Wolf. If I search for something like for your stuff, it always comes up with something you did 4 years ago, even though you just finished, something 4 minutes ago. So I kind of think that people at YouTube working for the ruling elite understand the danger of this kind of talk. In when they're creating the dynamics for revolution. At any rate, let's get right to it. We only got 30 minutes. Let's start here. The discussion when it comes to the election is a lot of it is about the hurt of everyday people. That I think the ruling elite understands that when it comes down to it, people that are hurting, they vote on that, and people have the hope. Oh well, maybe this candidate or that candidate can do something about the cost of housing, the cost of food at the grocery store, etc. So let's talk about that. Let's start with this: real estate. Is this fixable? Is this just a bubble? Is this bubble going to burst? What do we need to know about what is obviously a crisis when it comes? I put it like this: if you're in the working class, it's a crisis because you can't afford it. If you're in the ruling class, it's wonderful because you bought up all the houses and you can rent them out to those poor saps in the working class. The real estate crisis. What do we need to know, Professor Wolff?
Well, I think the answer lies, as it does so often, in the history that we are living through. And by that, I mean, let's take a look at why the working class is hurting. That seems to be a mystery. I keep reading in the newspaper that our economy is great, but the mass of the people don't seem to get it. They're kind of stupid, or they're asleep, or something is wrong. And then we have the writer of a piece like that explaining to us idiots why the economy is good. Well, here I am with my PhD in economics from all the fanciest universities, and let me assure you, the economy is bad, the people are right, and the people in the mass media and the politicians are trying desperately, and I want to underscore the word desperately, not to face that reality. So let me explain. The two biggest problems of our economy are the inequality that it breeds. I mean, look at it. Elon Musk can't figure out what to do with $250 billion of his personal wealth. That's obscene. At the same time, half of the people in this country can't cope with a $400 unexpected expense. Some medical problem or some personal difficulty. And now it is, as you just put it, a crisis for them. Of course they're angry. Of course they're upset. And their jobs are less secure than they have been in 50 years. Their wages have gone absolutely nowhere, barely keeping up with inflation for those who've done pretty well, and falling behind for the millions who haven't done that well, because you'd have to have an increase in your wages of, say, just 20-25% since the last period before the pandemic. If you didn't have that, you're falling behind. You are unable to buy as much as you could 5 years ago. So this is the reality. The second big horror show is the instability of our capitalist system. we go from pillar to post. We either have an inflationary problem or we're losing jobs and have a recessionary problem. I read the financial press every day. All there are speculations. Will the recession hit this year, next year, in 2 months, in 6? But the problem is, why are we in that situation? When I teach my courses at the university, at this point, I lean across the podium, look my students in the eye, and I say, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. It's unbearable. Even if it doesn't hit, the anxiety you feel about it. How do you make a decision to put money down for a house? How do you make a decision to borrow money to go to college, or any of big life decisions, get married, have children, if the instability threatens you at every turn? Now, here's the irony. The people running this society, they do, as you correctly said, they know, the statistics are there. It's no big secret. So what they've done, and you don't need a conspiracy theory, but what they've done is worry and therefore line up to give people a story to put them to sleep. And here's how it works. You come up with two completely phony explanations. So you say to people, okay, you can be angry. But here's who you get angry at. Those immigrants coming from Latin America and the Chinese. Now let's look at that, right? Let's take a look at how crazy that is. We're a country of 330 million people, one of the richest countries in the world. The immigrants coming are, according to the Department of Homeland Security, 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants who are among the poorest people on this planet. There is no way in God's green earth that 10 to 12 very poor immigrants are the cause of the economic problems of a country of 330 million people. It's ridiculous. It's beyond what you refute, because it's like saying, the world is upside down. Very clever idea, but you're not going to worry a lot about it because it's a big problem. The Chinese. Well, let's stop. Why are we angry at the Chinese? Because they produce a lot of goods. And so Americans, you hear, don't have jobs because the production went over to China. Well, that's true. But who made the decision to move the jobs from Cincinnati or Pittsburgh or Chicago to China? American corporations. They're the ones who decided to do that to make more money. The wages are cheaper, and China is the fastest, biggest growing market in the world. And every business school in America teaches young businessmen and women, if you want to be successful, you go where the wages are low and the market is expanding. And they all took it seriously and went to China. If you're upset about it, which you have every right to be, it's not China that's the problem. It is the decision-making way. We allow a tiny group of people, the employer class. According to the U.S. Census, that's 3% of our people are employers. The other 97%, you, Garland, me, we're not. We're employees. All right? Who decides where production happens? The employers. Who decides how much of a price to put on what they make? They do. We, the 97, pay the price. They're the ones who set it and get it. So if you run a system allowing the 3% who sit at the top to make all the key decisions, who to hire, what to produce, where to produce, what price to attach, then how come you're surprised that they're doing really well and you're not. As long as you don't change that basic system, that way of organizing the production and distribution of goods and services, we, the people, are going to come out on the short end. That's what they're protecting against. That's why they need to say, oh, it's the immigrants. Oh, it's the Chinese. And they divide the work. Mr. Trump rails about the immigrants and the Democrats rail about the Chinese. It's a division of labor. But it's a story that we ought to grow up. Listening to that kind of stuff is like having someone tell you that around Christmas time, there is this unusual reindeer who has a really big red nose. When you're 7, this is interesting. When you're 75, it ought to have gotten stale. Garland, you're muted.
I know a year or a couple of years ago, we were told that the Chinese had a massive real estate problem and that China was going to collapse as a result of it, right? And I forgot the name of the company or whatever.
Yes.
And we said, that's it for China. They're done. They're finished. This real estate thing is going to do them in. And it didn't. And they did a few things and they moved some things around and they're kind of still here. But yet, when we have these real estate bubbles, they just kind of collapse. The real estate price falls. The billionaires go in and buy it all at dirt cheap prices, and things eventually come back and they just get richer. Why is it that China's, I don't know that it's over, but what we were told about their real estate collapse never materialized? And ours, as I said right now, I don't know. I hope it's a bubble, because if it's going to stay this way, then, the circumstance, we'll all be homeless. At any rate, your thoughts?
Yes. I've been following the events in China pretty much all my adult life. When I was still a student, I wrote my master's degree thesis on the communes in China. That was a big thing back then. And I wrote about it, and I followed it ever since. And here's what I've learned. The United States is worried about China. And it has been since 1949, when they had a revolution in China. The communists won that revolution, and they've been running that country pretty much ever since. And for many years, in the 1960s, in 70s, and 80s, China would regularly issue, like all countries, statistics about how they were doing, how much their output was growing, what kind of inflation they did or didn't have, et cetera, et cetera. And the commentary in the American press was always the same. They're liars. It's not really that way. It's much worse and much worse. The first few times I listened to that, I thought it was probably true, but it turned out it wasn't. It turned out it was lots of propaganda, basically. After a while, I stopped paying attention. I said to myself, it may be true, it may not be true, but I can't rely. I mean, I won't go further than to make a little effort with you and your audience. Think to yourself how many times the American media have presented an article about something stunningly successful in China. No. You hear about the real estate bubble. You hear about whatever you can that is negative, scary about them. Okay, and now I get it. They're the bad guy, and so you say the bad thing. But here's the bottom line that you cannot refute. China is now, for the first time in a century for the United States, a serious economic competitor. If you go to China, you will see modern cities, skyscrapers, rapid trains. You will, if you go to the laboratories, whether they're biologic or physics or mathematics, you will see the most advanced work in the world, as good as what we have in the United States often, and better a good number of times. Let me give you an example. Over the last 10 years, there's been a global contest. Who can build the highest quality, lowest price electric vehicle, car or truck? GM tried it, and Ford and Toyota, all of them. Okay, you know who won that? A company you probably never heard of called the BYD, three initials, BYD Corporation. It is the biggest producer of automobiles in China. They did it. They produce the best quality electric cars and trucks in the world at the lowest price. Nobody can compete with them. If you go to Europe right now, you will see that a significant portion of the electric vehicles on the road there, and there are lots of them, are these Chinese BYD. There are other companies. They're not the only company, but they're the biggest one. By the way, how big? They just passed Tesla in China. There are more BYD electric vehicles in China now than Tesla, which was the biggest company there before. All right. Here in the United States, we have no such car. Why? Because Mr. Biden put 100% tariff. Not Mr. Trump. He only put a 25% tariff. But Mr. Biden raised it. So we can't buy those best cars. If you're an American business, you can't buy it because you would have to pay, let's say the car cost $30,000. You'd have to pay $30,000. That goes to China to pay for the car. And then another $30,000 goes to Uncle Sam in a tariff. So it would cost you $60,000, which you're not going to do. But your competitor in Europe, your competitor in Asia, Africa, Latin America, they can all get that cheap, higher quality car you can't get. You know what that means? The United States is shooting itself in the foot with these tariffs. But the story now becomes, look at the Chinese. In order for you to win the competition, you need the most advanced equipment there is. You need highly skilled auto workers. You need. They've got it all along. What they were telling us that they were developing, they've done it. Now the world knows it. Now I can tell it to you because the statistics can't be hidden anymore. China is the first competitor we've had. World War II got rid of all of our other potential competitors. It destroyed Britain and France and Italy and Germany and Japan, and they were the only ones who could have competed with us, and Russia too. China has developed since World War II and is now the great. And when you add to China that they have been clever and smart and built an alliance which is known as the BRICS, BRICS, then you will understand that China and the BRICS, and in case you didn't know this, let me tell you, China and the BRICS together produce more goods and services each year than the United States and its major allies known as the G7. That's the US, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. This is a new world we are living through and in. It's a world in which the last 100 years, when the United States was alone the big power that dominated, which we all got used to one way or another, that's gone. I say this as an American. I'm born in Ohio. I've lived and worked here all my life. But I'm not interested in playing games and make-believe. I'm interested in facing the reality and then trying to figure out how best to work in it. In the competition between the United States and China, in major ways, we are losing. And the question is now, what do you do? We're not finished or anything like that. We're still a rich country. We still have lots of capabilities. But we have to face the strengths we have and the weaknesses. We have to be and do like other countries always have. The empire, no empire in the history of the world lasted forever. The American Empire, which we built out of the collapse of the British Empire, it had a tremendous run, but around 2015, it was over, and we are now going down. And I understand, and I feel for all of you watching, listening, thinking about the world we live in. It's a lot less fun on the way down than it was on the way up. But we have to face it. The Chinese may be the next empire. If they've learned the lesson, they may be smart enough, I don't know, time will tell, to finally do what the human race has kind of understood. Maybe we shouldn't have empires. Maybe after World War I, when we tried to create something called the League of Nations, it was an understanding that rather than another empire, could we have a way of grouping and being together without one of us being the top dog? After World War II's horror, we tried again, the United Nations. Maybe the Chinese will be smarter than everybody else and not set up another empire, but actually try to institutionalize the impulse of the League of Nations and the United Nations. And if so, I would hope that our country participates in doing that. Otherwise, we will be in a struggle with China, two countries, each with nuclear weapons. We do not want to go there, because then we all lose.
We've got about 10 minutes. I'd like to ask you about inflation, just, a little more technical, something that people don't understand. We're hearing, both sides. If you just elect me, I'll fix inflation, blah, blah, blah. Now, what's interesting is they talk about inflation, but they don't talk about debt, right? We'll talk about inflation as if it's, and now they finally determined that corporate entities can act in a malevolent and malicious nature. While it's just price gouging, that's kind of the nature of capitalism in general. And we're going to stop price gouging as if they're just a few immoral leaders and corporations that are doing price gouging. It's not systemic. Few bad apples, as they say, that are price gouging us. If we just get those bad apples out of the way, the system itself will straight. Inflation, debt. People want prices of lettuce to go down. What do we need to know about this, Dr. Wolff?
Okay. As I'm speaking to you right now, there are about, I don't know the exact number, 30 to 35 states in the United States out of 50. So a majority of the states in this country right now have on the books anti-price gouging laws that were put into effect either in the 19th century or the 20th century or more recently. And basically they give the state authorities, the governor's office and so forth, the power to prevent price gouging. And usually what they mean by that is, let's say you have a hurricane or a terrible flood or something, and suddenly the price of bottled water goes to $10 for what you used to pay 50 cents for, the obvious, gross, and the government can come in. But the law is actually, in many cases, quite broad and leaves open what all the reasons are why the government could do it. Do these laws work? Mostly they don't. Now, they don't for many reasons. The government simply doesn't act on them. They could, but they choose not to. Why? Because the people who are gouging the price, here we go now, are again a very small number of people. Not because it's only a few bad apples, but because prices are set in this country mostly by a tiny group of corporate leaders who set the price. That Americans have to understand. If you're a worker anywhere, you have never been invited into the office at the work where you at the building where you work to participate that morning in price setting. You've got nothing to do. You are kept away from that. Your job is to make something or to serve something, but you don't set the prices. That is a prerogative of the people at the top. So the first thing to know about inflation is who is setting the price. Who decided that the price of eggs will go from $3 a dozen to $5 a dozen, and meaning you got an expensive breakfast? Okay, who does that? Answer: the people in charge of the egg business. Now, let's then answer the question: why would they jack up the prices? The answer is they do that for the same reason that they do all the other decisions they make. It's in order to maximize their profits. Sometimes the way they do that is they replace workers with machines. All working people know that. Sometimes they do that by firing native born workers and bringing in immigrants in, especially if they don't have documents, because you can squeeze them, you can pay them less, and they're afraid to go to the police because they don't have the documents. That's big in the United States, in those parts of the country where we have lots of immigrants. Here's another example: you lay off male workers and you hire females if you can pay females less. And we all know this. Setting prices is another way that a business leader, an employer, can maximize profits. They can get more. Now, of course, they're not stupid. They're not going to raise the price so much that the people who stop buying will buy enough less that they're behind. They won't do that. They won't charge, $200,000 for your average Ford car, because while that's real exciting, no one's going to buy a Ford car for two. So they raise it as much as they can get away with. That's it. Look, right now, just to give you an example, I'm going to give you an example where they decide to go the other way. Starbucks, McDonald's, they're lowering their prices right now as I'm talking to you. Why? Because they raised them so much, they're discovering there's a real fall off in the people that are buying a McDonald's hamburger or going in to get their latte. They made a mistake, so they bring the price down. So if you're upset with the prices you pay, which you have every right to, your anger should be directed at the fact that a tiny group of people, 3% of our people are employers, are making decisions about prices that hurt you. It's good for them. They're making more money. It's bad for you because your dollar doesn't go so far. And that means you can't feed yourself, feed your family, take care of your life. But you should that's what this issue is. It's what radicals used to call the class struggle, because that's really what this is about. Don't get lost in the details. People who write in big businesses tend to write as though inflation is like a bad storm that comes out of the sky and mysteriously, rains on us. And we're irritated and we want this terrible rain to stop. Don't do that. It isn't rain. It's a decision by people. I can tell you who they are. I can tell you why they're doing it. And you either accept it or you don't. Here's a little final point to think about. In a country that says democracy is a wonderful thing, why is it that we don't allow the prices of things to be set democratically? We all get together and we have a conversation about the prices. And people can come in and say, look, it can't go below that because that's how much it costs to make the thing. Okay, we'll listen. We're not crazy. But we don't want it to be 10 times that. We want the housing problem you referred to. Look, I'm an economist. I'll tell you what the basic economics of housing is. On the one hand is the price of the house. On the other hand is your income. Either the income is big enough to pay for that price or it isn't. A system that works gives people enough money to pay for the housing they need. If you have homeless people, it's a sign that the system is busted. You're not giving the people who need it the money they need to pay the price. Either bring the price down or pay the people more. This is not rocket science. And when you read an article full of complicated details and your eyes glaze over and you turn to the funnies, I understand why you do that. But you're being fooled. You're being played with. And you ought to be angry that shouldn't be done. It shouldn't even be tried. But you sure as shouldn't fall for it. That's our problem. We can set prices in a completely different way. I live here in Manhattan, in New York City. We have rent control here. We have rent stabilization. Employer, in this case, the landlords, they can't set any price they want. They can't do that. You know, at least for a portion of our apartments, they can't do that. There are market rents. They can charge whatever they want. But and you know why that was? Because in the 1930s, in the Depression, workers in New York City the working class fought for rent control. So they could not have happened to them what is happening now across the United States, that more and more people are paying, either can't afford any home and are sleeping outside or in a shelter someplace, or else there are too many people in too few square feet, which is another way of being unfair and unnecessary. We don't have that. The proof of it is the statistics today tell us that side by side with millions of people who don't have adequate housing, we have millions of housing units empty. That's the proof of an economic system that doesn't work. That's so crazy that even people who swear by capitalism really quite don't know what to say. Is it really acceptable to have an economic system that side by side has empty apartments and people with no place to live? It's, for me, it is as irrational as having millions of people who want a job and we can't give them a job. And you know why? Because no private employer can make a profit off of them. And we allow that profit to determine the unemployment of a person, which is devastating to them, to their family, and everything else. This is an irrational system. It's not working. And that's why people like me have become critics of capitalism, because that's what the situation, in our view, that's what it demands.
And that's why all the people in the chat and the people watching this are listening. I've said it time and again. I do radio in DC, various, Pacifica, etc. And over the past year, for a number of reasons, I've had people call me and say, I was wrong. You were all these years that I cursed Garland Nixon. What are you talking about on this radio? I was wrong. They're coming to the conclusion that this system is not broken. See, that's where they're wrong. It ain't. It works perfectly. They just didn't understand what it was designed to do.
Right. And you didn't know. Look, it's hard to face, Garland. It's hard to face that this is a system in which you and I are worker bees. We do our work, and other people become wildly wealthy. You don't want to face that, because in the end, it makes you feel like a mouse. It makes you feel like very little. It's hurtful. You would rather believe these other stories than face the fact, because if you listen to people like you and me, then the next step is we got to do something about this. And if we're not doing it, then we kind of feel, ooh, we're not doing what we kind of ought to do. And I don't know how to get around that, except I'm hoping that people will move. Because in the end, if the mass of people say we're not accepting this, It's over, Jack. That game is over. If we can just get people to say, won't accept this. I will not live like this. I will not hand this situation to my children to live with. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that. My children are at least going to see me fighting.
Professor Richard Wolff, you can find he's a great economist, a lot of fun to listen to in a paradoxical kind of way. You know, even though he tells you, look, things are bad, in a way, it's nice to know that, you know, there are options. And not, you know, when things are darkest, it's great to hear from people who say,
Right.
yes, things are terrible, but it can be fixed. Democracyatwork.info. That's the website you can go to find out all of his stuff. Also, he has a great YouTube, and that's also Democracy at Work, isn't it?
Yes, Democracy at Work. The name of the program we have around the country is called Economic Update, but it is a project of democracyatwork.info.
Thank you very much, Professor Wolff, and I look forward, hopefully, maybe next week or the week after. We need to talk after
Okay.
the election. We definitely need to talk
Yes,
after next Tuesday.
No matter what happens, we
to
need
discuss
to do that.
what you think is going to happen, the direction things are going to go. I think we already know whoever wins, the direction that things are going to go. Thank you very much, everyone. Don't forget, follow me on Rumble, follow me on Rockfin, because they could throw any of us at any time off of YouTube. Share this on all your social media platforms because you know it's going to be shadow banned. Thank you very much, Dr. Wolff. Thank you.